Okay, so let's get into a huge topic today, large-scale global movement. We're going to be looking at the facts, the hard realities for people who are, forced to leave their homes.
Mm.
And our goal here is pretty simple. We just want to clarify the key ideas, the definitions, and figure out what's really going on when we see these massive movements of people.
And we have to start with the scale because
Mm.
it's just astounding. People seeking safety is not a new thing. Of course, it's been happening throughout all of human history.
Sure.
But the sheer number of people today is bigger than ever before. Most of the laws we have to protect people were set up after the World Wars.
Right, in the 20th century.
Exactly. But the pressure on those laws now is immense. The global count of forcibly displaced people is over 110 million now.
Wow.
And that number has basically doubled in just the last 10 years or so.
Doubled in a decade. Okay,
Correct.
that number really sets the stage. So let's start with the basics, with the language. It can get really confusing. What is the actual difference between, say, a migrant and a refugee?
This is maybe the most important distinction to make because everything else, all the legal help, it all flows from this.
Okay.
So a general migrant is someone who chooses to move, usually for work or school, something like that. They can go home safely if they want to.
They have a choice.
They have a choice. A refugee, on the other hand, is defined in law as someone who is forced to leave their country. They're fleeing war or persecution or a serious threat to their life.
So it all comes down to whether leaving was a choice or not.
Precisely. And that's where things get a bit more technical. If someone arrives at a border and asks for that kind of protection, their initial status is an asylum seeker.
Okay, so they're asking to be recognized as a refugee.
Yes. They're in the process. They're waiting for a government or an international group to officially say, yes, you meet the strict legal criteria.
And there's another group, right? I've heard they're actually the biggest part of that 110 million number.
That's right. They're called internally displaced persons, or IDPs. An IDP is fleeing the exact same dangers as a refugee war, disaster, but they haven't crossed an international border.
They're still in their own country.
They are, and that's a huge deal legally because they aren't protected by international refugee laws. Their own government is supposed to be responsible for them, but often that government is unstable or is even the reason they fled in the first place. It puts them in a really tough spot.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the law is that clear, what are the forces that are powerful enough to make millions of people leave everything behind? What's driving all this?
Well, it's almost never just one thing. They kind of pile up on each other. The most immediate cause we see for, sudden and massive displacement is armed conflict.
War.
War, yeah.
Yeah.
But those wars are often happening in places that are already dealing with other deep issues.
Like I'm thinking climate change making things less stable.
Exactly. Environmental changes are a huge factor. A long drought can wipe out farming. It's not always a sudden hurricane. Sometimes it's this slow, grinding pressure where people just can't grow food anymore. And if you can't eat, you have to move.
And when you have conflict and environmental problems, I guess the economy is usually the next thing to go.
That's the third driver, yeah. Economic collapse. When your life savings become worthless and you can't afford bread, you move for basic survival.
Yeah.
And then finally, there's persecution, where people are targeted specifically because of who they are or what they believe. Usually it's a mix of these things that makes staying home impossible.
So we know why people are forced to leave. What about the journey itself? We hear that it's brutal, but what does that actually mean? What are they facing?
The journey it's incredibly dangerous. We're talking about distances of thousands of miles, often over really rough terrain.
And not in a comfortable car, I'm guessing?
No, often on foot. Or packed into unsafe trucks or boats. These trips can go on for weeks, even months.
The physical exposure alone must be intense.
It is. You have people crossing deserts in extreme heat or mountains in the freezing cold with barely any supplies. They run out of food, clean water. On top of that, there's a financial cost. Many spend their entire life savings just to pay smugglers to get them across a border.
So they arrive with absolutely nothing.
Nothing. And they're under incredible stress, families get separated, and real safety isn't guaranteed until they reach a place where international laws are actually being enforced. Before that, they're completely vulnerable.
So once they manage to get away, where do they usually end up? I think a lot of us see news reports and assume most people are trying to get to wealthy Western countries. Is that what the data shows?
That's a really common misconception, actually. The data tells a completely different story.
Yeah.
The vast majority of displaced people, something like 70%, stay in their own region.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they go to a neighboring country. Most people want to stay close to home. They're hoping the crisis will end so they can go back.
But that must put a huge amount of pressure on those neighboring countries.
A tremendous amount. The stats show this again and again. It's not the wealthiest countries, but lower and middle income countries that host most of the world's refugees. Places like Turkey, Iran, Colombia, Pakistan, their local systems, schools, hospitals, water are put under immediate massive strain.
And in these places, many people end up in camps. What is a modern refugee camp actually like?
Well, at first, it's just an emergency setup. Tents, basic shelters, usually right near a border. There's not much there. Maybe limited electricity, very little privacy.
But they don't stay that way, do they?
No, because people often can't go home for years. So these temporary places start to evolve. They basically become small cities.
Like a whole new town springs up.
Exactly. A large camp might have hundreds of thousands of residents. They'll have schools, markets, small clinics. Aid workers focus on creating routines, on making it a safe and functioning place, not just a patch of dirt with tents.
What about the communities that are already there? The host communities, we talked about the strain on their resources. Is there any upside for them?
The initial shock is really hard, there's no question. When a town's population suddenly doubles, local services get overwhelmed. There can be tension over jobs and resources.
That makes sense.
But over the long term, and if it's managed well, there can be benefits. Newcomers can actually boost the local economy. They start businesses, they buy things, they bring new skills, but it requires real support for both the local community and the new arrivals so they can work together instead of competing.
Let's talk about the big picture then, the global response.
hmm
Who are the main players trying to manage all this?
Global organizations are absolutely essential. They handle the massive logistics of getting aid, food, water, medicine to where it needs to go. No single country could do that alone. But even more important is their role in upholding the law.
And that law is built on one really important agreement, right? The 1951 Refugee Convention.
That's the cornerstone. That document, and a later one from 1967, lays out the basic rights of refugees, but the absolute bedrock principle in that law is something called non-refoulement.
Okay, that sounds technical. What does it mean?
It's a French term. It just means non-sending back. It's the rule that says you cannot send someone back to a country where their life or freedom would be in serious danger.
Got it. So it's the ultimate safety net.
It is. It's considered a fundamental part of international law. It's the one rule that can't be negotiated away.
So if going home isn't an option, what happens to families in the long term? I've heard the term resettlement.
That's one path, but it's pretty rare. Resettlement is when refugees are moved from the country they first fled to a new third country that has agreed to give them a permanent home, like from a camp in Jordan to a new life in Canada, for example.
And I'm guessing that's a long process.
Incredibly long. It involves years of background checks and screening. It's usually only for the most vulnerable people. The more common path is integration into the country they first reached.
And what does integration actually involve? Is it all in the newcomers to adapt?
No, absolutely not. It has to be a two-way street. The newcomers need to learn the language, find jobs, understand the culture. But the host community has to provide ways for them to do that, like access to schools and fair job opportunities. If both sides don't put in the effort, it just doesn't work.
I want to ask specifically about kids. You mentioned schools and camps. Why is education so critical in a crisis like this?
It's about so much more than just learning math or reading. For a child who has been through trauma, school provides a routine. It gives them a sense of normalcy and stability.
It's a safe
A
place?
safe, protected place where they can just be kids for a few hours. It also makes sure that an entire generation doesn't lose their education, which is so important for their future.
So it's about providing hope, really.
It's totally about hope. Giving young people skills helps them prepare for a future where they can support themselves and contribute, no matter where they end up. It's about not letting a crisis define their entire lives. You know, when you look at all of it, the huge numbers, the legal definitions, the dangerous journeys, it all comes back to the root causes. The future of all this really depends on how well countries can work together to promote peace and fix the problems that force people to flee in the first place.
Understanding all these details, the definitions, the journeys, the laws, is really the first step to figuring out better and more humane solutions. Thanks for joining us. Good luck with your studies.